Hello, and thank you for joining our virtual Destination Station. Destination Station is a NASA outreach event that connects companies and researchers with representatives from NASA and the ISS National Lab to discuss ways they can utilize the International Space Station, our incredible microgravity laboratory, to advance their research and technology development. Destination Station has visited multiple cities around the country and has become a shining example of collaboration between NASA and the ISS National Lab in a quest to provide joint education of station's capabilities and opportunities. We, like all of you, have learned to adjust to a new way of life. We've discovered avenues to educate potential researchers in new and novel ways and have updated our approach to include platforms like this virtual Destination Station. Over the years, NASA and the ISS National Lab have used this forum to engage with a variety of partners that have since become part of the space station research community, representing highly recognizable companies as well as academic institutions. We hope this event will provide all researchers and viewers an understanding of the incredible research capabilities available when you take gravity out of the equation. We will share with you examples of experimentation and let you hear from the perspective of astronaut Victor Glover on what it is like to execute these experiments in space. As we look to the future of the International Space Station, we see incredible promise and opportunity. For over 21 years, astronauts have been living and working in space continuously, facilitating more than 3,000 different experiments. And the knowledge gained from those years of pushing the limits of science and innovation have informed us on target areas that will bring value to our nation and push an emerging market in low Earth orbit. We hope that events like this will help ignite possibilities for how the space station's microgravity environment can be a part of your research and development portfolio. We have a great schedule to make today's event educational and enriching for you. Welcome to Destination Station.
Thank you so much, Jennifer, and thank you all for joining us today. My name is Christine Kretz. I'm the Vice President of Programs and Partnerships for the ISS National Laboratory, and I'm with a distinguished group of panelists today that I'm thrilled to have join us. So let me first introduce my colleagues. Liz Warren from my team, Senior Program Director for Biological Sciences, is part of the ISS National Lab, and she joins us today from Texas. Jennifer Buckley, Deputy Chief Program Scientist for NASA, is also, I believe, in Texas today, so virtual indeed. Thank you for joining us, Jennifer. Last, but certainly not least, our special guest, Victor Glover, NASA astronaut and pilot, so is here with us today. We're excited to have this wonderful panel with us. Today we're going to talk about a lot of different kinds of things going on in the space station, and we're extremely grateful for the news that the space station will continue on to 2030. With that, we're going to get started, but first I remind you to use the Q&A section. We'll take questions as best we can throughout the talks, but we'll take questions directed to the panelists for live answer at the end of Victor's talk. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to Jennifer Buckley from NASA, and thank you again for joining us.
Thank you, Christine, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. Before we get into our discussions today, I'd like to share with you a short video highlighting some of the research we're doing on the International Space Station.
The International Space Station is a state-of-the-art microgravity laboratory that is unlocking discoveries not possible on Earth and helping us push farther into deep space.
Every single day, we are answering big questions about Earth and about space, about where we came from and about where we're going. But the other thing that we're doing is we're learning more questions to ask.
Microgravity turns almost everything we know upside down. Liquids behave completely differently. Fire burns in new ways. Biological systems reveal surprises.
There's a few things that have made me gasp out loud up on board Space Station. Watching heart cells actually beat has been a pretty big one.
We're studying ways to grow food in microgravity.
I got to tell you, these are pretty amazing.
We're learning how human bodies react to life in space and how to keep crew members safe and strong on long-duration exploration missions.
Deadlifts are awesome on Earth. They're also awesome in zero gravity.
We're testing technologies that will be critical to our return to the moon and great leap to Mars. Our research has contributed to medical and social benefits on our home planet, allowing us to find new ways to combat disease back on Earth and develop technologies to deliver clean water to remote communities in need. The spectacular vantage point of more than 200 miles above our planet supports our monitoring of Earth's climate, natural disasters, and plant life.
I can't begin to describe some of the sights that you get to see. It's just an incredible view of our planet that we have from here.
The growing new space economy, so vital to our continued progress in space, is flourishing in low Earth orbit. We're inspiring future generations from a platform that is one of the largest international collaborations of our time. We're doing science at 17,500 miles per hour. Come along for the ride.
Okay, thank you. I don't think I will ever tire of seeing those images. I love watching folks and our astronauts doing research on ISS. And so now I'd like to talk a little bit more about that research and why we do research in microgravity. So when we talk about why explore, as humans, I feel like we have an innate drive to discover and explore. Beyond that desire, there's also some tangible aspect to exploration. So exploration requires innovation and results in discovery. Innovation creates new technology, and discovery results in new knowledge. That technology and knowledge create economic opportunities as well. And those economic opportunities support our further exploration. So let's talk about why you want to do research on ISS in particular. Why do we do research in space? We have sustained microgravity. So this eliminates gravity effects, allowing researchers to understand other factors. Once you take gravity out of the equation, you can look at your research in a totally new way. The low Earth orbit vantage point. ISS is 240 miles above the Earth and has an orbital path over 90% of the Earth's population. It's a great platform for studying climate change and issues back here on Earth. They have a unique extreme environment, including hard vacuum, thermal variations, extreme heat, extreme cold, radiation, atomic oxygen, and micrometeoroids. It's a great place to test materials. We've tested a number of spacecraft coatings outside of the International Space Station. So if you'd like to understand more about ISS research, we won't have time to go into all of it today. There's a great series that I suggest checking out called NASA Explorers, and this particular episode focuses on microgravity. I would like to talk about the types of research that are on ISS. We have a wide variety of different scientific disciplines that utilize the International Space Station. We perform biology and biotechnology, human research, Earth and space science, physical sciences, technology development, and educational activities. So STEM and inspiring the next generation also is a big part of our mission. I'd like to talk a little bit about the ISS and give you some quick stats. This is your orbiting laboratory. The spacecraft length is about the same as an American football field. So you'll see some numbers coming up on the screen. So a cool perspective, I think, is thinking about the ISS. It weighs approximately the same as the maximum takeoff weight for the world's largest passenger airliner. The pressurized volume living space is about the equivalent of a 5-bedroom house. And as I talked about, its orbital path covers 90% of the world's populated living areas. So the views are quite spectacular. Next chart. I'd like to take this opportunity to introduce you to your on-orbit research team. Right now on International Space Station, we have Expedition 66. So this is your research team. They're the best and the brightest, and they're very dedicated to the science that we do on Space Station and making your flight project successful. They travel to and from the space station roughly about every 6 months. Today on board, we have Raja Chari, Tom Marshburn, Matthias Maurer, Anton Skaplarov, Peter Dubrov, Kayla Barron, and Mark Vandehei. So quick history and statistics about the International Space Station. On November 2nd of 2020, we celebrated 20th continuous human presence years in space. So basically, that was in 2020. If you know anyone over the age of 21 right now, then yeah, we've been in space for, this will be our 22nd year. More than 4,000 researchers from more than 100 countries have conducted more than 3,000 experiments on Space Station, resulting in more than 2,000 publications. And with that, I hope you will want to join us in being part of bringing your experiments to the International Space Station. And I'd like to welcome my colleague from the US National Lab, Dr. Liz Warren.
Thank you, Jennifer. Hey, next slide. First, I'm going to introduce you to the ISS National Laboratory. In 2005, the US Congress designated the US portion of the space station as a national laboratory. So what exactly does that mean? It means that this very unique research facility is open to users like yourselves to solve big questions. The Center for the Advancement of Science and Space manages the ISS National Laboratory. We're not just opening the doors to space, we're scouring the nation through events like this to let you know that you have access to this amazing laboratory in low Earth orbit. Whether you're an engineer, a scientist, you're at a corporation, an academic institution, other government agency, maybe you're a middle school or high school student, we have opportunities available for you to explore your science, make new discoveries, or even make new products in space. Next slide. So why do we do all of this? We manage the ISS National Laboratory as a public service in order to benefit the US taxpayer and to foster a scalable and sustainable low Earth orbit economy. We facilitate public-private partnerships. We create demand, incubate in-space business ventures, provide access for and awareness of discovery science and technological innovation, and promote science literacy for the future workforce. Now let's talk about the ISS National Lab research portfolio. Next slide. To help streamline and focus some of the research and development efforts, the ISS National Lab supports 5 different business lines. So as Jennifer described earlier, microgravity has profound effects on physical systems. Surface tension and capillarity dominate fluid behavior. Buoyancy-driven convection and sedimentation don't exist. Hot air doesn't rise and cold air doesn't fall. Microgravity also has profound effects on living systems, from microbes to cells to animals and humans. There are some pretty profound changes brought about by exposure to spaceflight. And again, the space station provides an ideal platform to test remote sensors for studying the Earth and the cosmos, as well as advancing technologies in an austere environment. As Jennifer said, when we speak to researchers out there, we like to tell them that doing your science in space is like looking at your research topic through an entirely new lens of discovery. Next slide. So the space station is a world-class multidisciplinary laboratory. There are glove boxes, there are -80-degree freezers, refrigerators, incubators, and microscopes like you'd find in any laboratory here on Earth. We have plant greenhouses, we have rodent habitats, and a DNA sequencer. Next slide. There are furnaces, centrifuges, 3D printers, and facilities for conducting combustion research, fluid research, and quantum physics. The coldest place in the universe is inside the ISS in the Cold Atom Laboratory. There are also facilities on the exterior of the space station for studying our Earth and the cosmos, for materials testing in the extreme environment of space, or even for deploying CubeSats. Next slide. So now I'll touch on a few specific examples from the ISS National Lab portfolio. Here's an example from Adidas. That team wondered if they can improve the performance of their Boost shoe midsole. So in production, particles of foam are fused together into that midsole. But the ordering of those particles, you can kind of think of it like marbles. It's subject to gravitational settling when you pour them into a container. They were looking to see if microgravity can result in a better distribution of those particles, and maybe that distribution would result in a better performance of the midsole. If so, this is something they can work to reproduce in manufacturing on Earth. This is actually their third project with us as they explore new ways to innovate their products, and I'm looking forward to seeing their results. Next slide. The environment in low Earth orbit, as we've said, is pretty extreme. And you can ask Victor about that later. He's been outside. We use that extreme environment to test as an accelerated materials platform. So shown here is the Alpha Space Facility, where users can expose their samples to radiation, extreme temperature deltas, the vacuum of space, atomic oxygen, and micrometeorite impacts. Next slide. Several companies, such as Made in Space, are investigating improved manufacturing processes in space that are unimpeded by the distorting effects of gravity. Next slide. Thin film deposition is an important process in the production of many consumer electronics, semiconductors, precision optics, and even medical devices. The example shown here is a retinal implant in development by a company called Lambda Vision. Their aim is to restore vision to patients of macular degeneration and other diseases of the retina. In microgravity, thin films are more homogeneous and free of sedimentation defects. Next slide. So you don't need to be a space engineer or an expert in space engineering to do any of this work. You will have a partner. We call them implementation partners or payload developers. They're going to work right by your side to translate what you do in your laboratory into something that works in the spaceflight environment. Next slide. There are also many ways for students to get involved with the space station and even launch their own experiments to space. STEM engagement from K through 12 and higher education is critically important to NASA and the ISS National Lab. And what better way to inspire and excite our young people than with space? We have so many educational resources organized by students, teachers, and parents. You can visit our website at issnationallab.org/STEM to learn more. We'll repeat that at the end of this presentation. Next slide. That brings us back to the big picture of why are we doing all of this? It's all about science and space to benefit life on Earth. Next slide. So if we have piqued your interest we have a website with all of our current and upcoming research announcements listed on our website shown here. You can learn about the future of solicitations and research announcements here, and we encourage you to visit and learn more about how you can get involved. Next slide. We also have an exciting annual conference that you're going to want to check out. We're in Washington, D.C. this year, July 25 through 28, and we hope to see you there. Next slide. So we encourage you to engage with us on social media and get in touch with us via the email you see on this slide. We want to give you a real person to reach out to. Sean Pfeiffer would love to hear from you, and he's going to help answer any questions you have and direct them to experts to help you think through your process, think through your experiment, and think about which research solicitation may best fit your needs. Next up, it is my honor to hand it over to NASA astronaut Victor Glover. A captain in the US Navy, Victor most recently served as the pilot and second in command of the Crew 1 SpaceX Crew Dragon, named Resilience, which landed back on Earth, splashed down, I should say, on May 2nd of 2021. As flight engineer on the International Space Station for Expedition 64, Victor completed 168 days in orbit and participated in 4 spacewalks. Victor, over to you.
Thanks, Liz, and welcome to everyone out there over the internet. Thank you for joining us. If you've been taking copious notes, this is the time where you can put your pens and pencils down and just come with me on a journey. You can go ahead and advance to the video and you can start rolling. It's a pleasure to be here and to share a little bit about our mission, the opportunity to be a part of the culmination of the goals of the Commercial Crew Program for continuous access to the International Space Station. That was our crew, Mike Hopkins, Shannon Walker, and Soichi Noguchi, and this is Building 9, our space vehicle mock-up facility where we were training mainly for ISS systems and emergency procedures, getting ready for ISS. And one of the amazing things about this time was during the pandemic, this is pre-pandemic, but during the pandemic, we had to continue to train, but also to keep each other healthy, and including the trainers and the flight controllers and our SpaceX partners. And the team came together to find a way to allow us to keep training. This is in our neutral buoyancy lab, the giant 6 million gallon pool where we train for spacewalks. And then of course, something I very much love, that's the aviation, flying the high performance aircraft, the T-38 there that we fly out of Ellington Field, where we get to work on every aspect of human spaceflight: communication, teamwork, stress management, regulation, and communication. And then we headed off to Kennedy Space Center, where we were getting ourselves ready for launch. And you saw the shot there of us in the suit up room before the rollout or walkout to the rocket. And that is, this is not a simulation. This is launch day. We walked out and it was daytime and we got to see our rocket there on the pad. This is like the perfect timing. You get to go out in the daytime and get strapped in, and then we set up for this beautiful nighttime launch.
4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Ignition.
That was November 16th, Florida time, and Greenwich Mean Time. It was on November 16th of 2020, and the Falcon 9 was a beautiful ride into low Earth orbit. And you just heard her say, even gravity can't hold us down when we explore space together. All for one, crew one for all. That was our motto.
You then get a gold pin to be able to give Victor Glover his gold astronaut pin passing 100 kilometers.
And that was an extremely special moment when they gave me my gold astronaut pin. You start with a silver one, and then once you go to space, when you're above 100 kilometers, you're qualified for a gold astronaut pin. And that was very special. Shannon is now demonstrating how you drink water in space.
And then you can take a drink.
And so once we got into orbit safely and the systems all checked out, we had about a 27-hour phasing to catch up with the International Space Station. And it was a very nice ride. And then we docked to the forward docking adapter on ISS, and all of that went pretty smoothly. And then we had the fortune to join our crewmates Sergey, and Kate on the International Space Station. So the 7 of us were the crew for the beginning of our mission, and you saw pictures there previously of the crew that's on board now. And so 7 people now are a normal crew complement to do all of the science, spacewalk, and maintenance that is required. You heard him talk about these facilities, these amazing facilities, and that was the life sciences glove box. We do work in the microscience glove box. We had so many different science activities going on. It is very busy on ISS. In the opening video, you heard them say that over the 21 plus years we've had folks on station, we've done 3,000 experiments. And some days it feels like you're doing that many in one day. And I think during our increment, we had somewhere between 200 and 300 different experiments going. And plants were a very big one. Our crew and the science team on the ground really had some activities they wanted to see done. And so we were using the advanced plant hab, the veggie facility to grow those cruciferous greens there. We also had this Japanese plant growth activity in GEM that Soichi was conducting. And plants were an important one to our crew because it's an important capability, but also it's something that provides a lot of well-being for the crew. Astrobee was another one. I think we really play like the referees, and the Astrobees are in there playing a game of soccer or ping pong together. And so we do a lot of sitting and just watching them operate while the team on the ground is controlling these vehicles. But it is a very engaging activity, and we give comments on what we're seeing and you know, provide the color commentary for the crews on the ground. But this one was a very fun experiment to work on. Just every time I see these videos, I think of the movie Star Wars and Luke Skywalker training with his lightsaber and the small robot flying around it. And I really got to do that. It was truly amazing, truly amazing. And you know, you heard them talk about the way flames behave in space, and so understanding the way that they propagate, some of the basic physics that we get to study, it's just truly amazing to see it in person, to see a droplet of fuel burn in a sphere, almost a perfect sphere. It's truly amazing. This is Soichi Noguchi working in the GEM airlock. That's the slide table as he's putting together the container that we use to deploy CubeSat satellites. And the CubeSat standard has different configurations. And so you can see one here that's made up of 3 modules being launched from the outside of the International Space Station using the GEM robotic arm. There's a robotic arm outside the Japanese laboratory. All in all, we conducted lots of science, but I think the most engaging science, the things that really stand out with me are the experiments where the crew are the primary thing that is being investigated. Your perception, your situational awareness, your assessment of the passage of time, your orientation ability, your changes in heart rate, muscle density, bone density, your eyes, all of these things that are changing as your body is adapting to living in microgravity are some of the things that I thought were the most engaging. While we were there, we had several cargo vehicles show up, and those bring new science experiment, new hardware, also, you know, clothing for the crew and food. And so it's a really special time to get cargo vehicles. And we had the new Dragon 2 cargo variant that looks very much like the spaceship we flew. We also had the Cygnus vehicle, and this is Soichi and Mike Hopkins in the cupola preparing to capture a Cygnus vehicle. The SS Katherine Johnson that we had the honor of doing cargo operations on. A very large capability that brings up tons of cargo. And it was awesome, just like Mike said. And it's a little bit like the holidays. You can say it's like Christmas, especially the aspect of your family coming and staying with you, you know. It's fun and it's a great time, but it's also a lot of work and it can be very busy when cargo vehicles are on board the station. They bring up science that often has to be completed while they're there so that you can put the science back into this cargo Dragon, for example, into these refrigerator and freezer modules so that you can return the science, the samples back down to the ground in a timely fashion. So it's very busy. And you see, this is working inside the cargo Dragon and Cygnus, both some amazing capabilities for upmass, and then the cargo Dragon being able to bring things back to the ground. And riding the CTBs out of the cargo vehicles, you see, we took some time to make a fun video about, you know, moving things around the space station. And living on the International Space Station, like I said, it can be a little bit like having relatives come to visit, you know, when you get all these the vehicles to come to the space station. And so likewise, oh, this is a really, I'm sorry, I have to, that was the NanoRack airlock. I'll talk some more about that in a second. But when these cargo vehicles leave, it's also like when your relatives leave after the holidays. It's, you know, you're sad to see them go, but you take a breath and go, whew, all right, now we can start getting ready for next holiday season. And that's kind of what it feels like when the cargo vehicles leave ISS. You get a little bit of a breather, and you get ready for the next cargo vehicle to come up. And you know, one of the things that doesn't get a lot of talk is the importance of the logistics of some of this science. You're seeing now the science being brought back to the ground and transferred immediately back to the folks that get this to the provider in a timely fashion. That's something that is super important, being able to get that hardware and science back to the ground. Spacewalks, Liz mentioned we had the opportunity to do, I went out on 4, we did a total of 5 spacewalks in 45 days. That's a pretty brisk pace. We were very busy. And you see it takes the whole team. Shannon Walker was putting water in the cooling garments. This is Soichi and Kate getting Mike and I into the crew lock as we prepare to depressurize it and go out into the vacuum of space. And people often ask me, what was that very first moment when you went out on your very first spacewalk? Like, and I'll tell you, I was purposefully not looking down at the ground. That's what my helmet camera saw, but I was looking at my hands there in the foreground. As I grabbed that handrail, all I was thinking about was that handrail and not the earth 260 miles beneath me, because I wanted to focus on the task at hand. We had to get a very large antenna out of the crew lock, put that on my body restraint, and then I had to put my feet into the robotic arm so that it could carry me over to the European laboratory. And we were going to install that antenna on the laboratory. And Kate and Soichi were working the robotic arm to move me over to the laboratory as we would install that antenna. So I spent my time focusing on that work. But after a few hours, you see now there I'm connecting cables. We had a problem with one of the cables, and I had some time to stop and look around. And this was about the time I had my first chance to stop and look. And the sun was down, it was dark. And so when I took a breath and leaned back and looked around, it was right as the sun came back up, and it was so amazing. I felt like Leonardo DiCaprio in Titanic, right there on the front of space station with nothing but this beautiful view of Earth. This is on that same spacewalk. The antenna had a cover on it that it was too big to bring back in, so I manually jettisoned it. That's something we don't do often, and with all the issues about orbital debris, you can be comforted that it's going to enter the atmosphere and burn up, and it's not a threat to the ISS. I asked them that before they asked me to throw that thing away. So this is a very special spacewalk. We were building the platform to put these new rollout solar arrays on. And this is a very interesting project because we are upgrading the power system on the space station to keep it being a viable laboratory and facility in low Earth orbit for years to come. And this activity is neat because back years ago, we had the rollout solar array demonstration where we proved that this technology would work. And now years, you fast forward, and here we are building the platform, and then Crew 2 came up and installed one of the first solar arrays. And so now we have new solar arrays on the ISS. The ISS is a great place to demonstrate technology and to do also all levels of research, from basic to applied to advanced and manufacturing demonstrations. It is such an amazing place that we get to do that. And this is one of our final spacewalks. You see Mike and I unsuiting Soichi and Kate from their spacewalk. Living on space station. I wish we could just talk about this. This is, you know, living together in space, the human aspect of it. You know, we have meals around the table and have fun. You see videos of us filming some of our fun times, our traffic circle that we made in Node 1 where we eat. Taking time to take pictures of one another and take videos of each other is something we made an intentional effort to do, because we knew that we would have so many pictures of Earth and the science that we wanted to remember the times that we spent together. That time together was so important. At one point, when Crew 2 came up, we had 11 crew members on board the station, but it never felt crowded. There you see Soichi on his free time demonstrating how fluids behave in space. Like Liz mentioned earlier, capillary flow and surface tension are very important when you take away gravity. And this is us having fun again, showing what a moment on space station looks like. We did the mannequin challenge, if you're familiar with that. I like to brag, we did that in one take, the very first time, and we got it. And so outreach is also another very important part of what we do on ISS there, and being able to talk to kids and scientists, researchers, and people all over the planet is a very important part of what we do. Exercising, one of my favorite things we do in space, and this is actually me doing a little bit of a scientific investigation. We normally use a towel. Doing sit-ups in space is very challenging, and so I took my harness that we use to run on the treadmill that holds us down to the treadmill, and I connected the pulley to it to see if I could find a new way to do sit-ups. And I like using that harness for sit-ups, but working out in space was one of my favorite memories, especially when you look down at the cupola and you can see the sunrise or sunset like you're seeing here. I mean, the best gym view on the planet.
Happy holidays to everyone, and thank you for a great year.
Being there from November to May, we were there for the holidays, and so wishing Mission Control a Merry Christmas. You saw my family socks there.
1. Happy New Year!
And again, it is an international space station, so we celebrated New Year and all of the Orthodox New Year and holidays from all of the countries that were represented on ISS, and that is truly some of my favorite memories. Again, being able to see the Earth from space, it's really hard to put it in words. These videos and images just don't do it justice. When you add the depth, humans throughout history have tried so hard with microscope and telescope technology to be able to see the very big and the very small at our level. And boy, to go up high above the Earth and look down at the Earth and to see it with your own eyes, unaided, is just truly spectacular. But this is a very important capability that we have to be able to see how our coastlines are changing, how our forests are changing, and to also see things like to watch a dust cloud blow off the west coast of Africa toward the east coast of the United States, and to be able to see it move and travel, and to really see how connected the Earth is, and to be able to look out at the horizon and see that atmosphere, how thin it is, but how vital it is to supporting human life. It is just amazing. It's a perspective that is truly hard to describe, but it is vital that we try and share that perspective. The Earth is so amazing, so robust, but it is also fragile in some ways, and we have to protect it. We have to look after it. So many amazing views. And I happened to be on ISS with Soichi Noguchi. We nicknamed him the Master. He took a lot of these videos and photos. He was so amazing at capturing the beauty and the magic of what the Earth looked like in day and at night. He was our go-to guy when it came to photography and videography. If any one of us could have just spent our entire mission taking photos and videos, I think we would have done that. It is definitely one of the favorite things to do on board ISS. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the overview effect later. You know, looking at the Earth from space does change someone's worldview or accelerate your worldview. And I'll talk to you about my thoughts on that. So coming home, preparing to come home, we got to do a practice for undock and entry by doing a port relocation. We moved our spacecraft from the forward docking adapter up to the top and parked our vehicle there. Which was a great dry run, but we moved out of the way so that Crew 2 would have a place to park their spacecraft. And so Crew 2 showed up, and the 7 of us welcomed the 4 of them for a total of 11 people. And, there was a line for the bathroom sometimes, but like I said, it never really felt crowded. And so once Shannon literally handed over the key to ISS to Aki as the new commander of ISS, we did our best to hand over and turn over with Crew 2 so that they could take ISS and do the same thing, science, maintenance, spacewalks, and then we got out of their way and we undocked to get ready and come home. This is an animation of the entry, descent, and landing of the Crew Dragon. And this phase was amazing. Shortly after that video that you just saw, we start to get the plasma, the atmospheric heating around the vehicle, and it was bright orange and pink. And so I asked the commander, can I turn the lights off? And he said, absolutely. And so as we were streaking through the atmosphere inside of a fireball, the lights were out completely, and you could see the orange and pink inside the capsule. It was so amazing, such an amazing view. We turned the lights back on, we got the drogue chutes out. You could very much feel that. It felt like the opposite of launch. We're turned around backwards, so the G still goes into your chest like it does when you're launching on ascent. And so the G's start to build up, and you can feel gravity slowly being programmed back in as we get closer to the Earth. And then the main parachutes come out, and we see that descent rate. That means we got 4 good main chutes. And when we hit the water, the first night landing since 1968 during the Apollo program, it was amazing to see those lights around us in the water. Because it was dark, it was so easy to see them. All of us exhaled. For the first time in 168 days, we knew that we could relax because the ground team was responsible for getting us out, and we weren't the one responsible for doing the next activity like we were for the 5.5 months prior to that. And that's where all of this excitement and the smiles come from, because we know our family and our friends and our team can finally relax and exhale and go, mission complete. We're all back home safely. Well, almost all the way back home. This is when we get home, when we fly back. This is maybe 6 hours after splashdown, and it's truly amazing to be looking at, you know, your friends and family, and knowing that less than a day ago you were in space on the ISS or in Crew Dragon. Truly amazing. Shannon's happy dance right there says it all. So I'll just end with a couple of ideas. Thanks for joining me on that journey. It's hard to narrate because I just want to sit back and watch those videos myself. Such an amazing opportunity that we had flying the first operational mission of the Crew Dragon spacecraft after the first crewed mission with Bob Behnken and Doug Hurley, and being able to help the ISS and the commercial crew programs to make that dream a reality was truly special. And, you know, what's the point of it all? You know, you've heard people talk about the science and all this, and I'm just going to share with you some perspective that I've been thinking about a lot since I've been back, and I talked a bit about this while I was on orbit with a group of folks that asked me the question, why do we need humans in space exploration? Why the human? You know, all of the things that you heard about how the research makes things better here on Earth in medicine, navigation, communication, safety, transportation, all of those things are true and they're important. Those are extremely vital. But the human beings up there, because of our human connection and our understanding of one another, that human connection is the foundation of the inspiration that comes with putting people in space. It inspires people to the action of doing the best that they can at very challenging things. And that, to me, is why humans going into space will be a part of our exploration for decades to come. The human being is what gives us the personal connection to exploring the cosmos. And that inspiration drives action that is vital to the economy, but to our country and humanity in the future. And the last thing I want to talk about is this overview effect. You know, there's books on this, and you can read about it if you want to in the overview effect. But this idea of going to space, changing your worldview, when you see the Earth as it truly is, no borders, no labels, and you see the fragility, but also the robust nature of this planet and how it's alive and moving. And it just, I think it doesn't create something in you. It accelerates things that are going on in you. And I think as astronauts, we get there. And for me, it was the realization that looking at the Bay of Biscay and seeing the clouds swirling around it, looking at that whole body of water, after months of being in space, it was an amazing view and it was very impactful. But I thought to myself, I would really love to be down there walking along the coastline. And when I would see these beautiful city lights at night, I would say to myself, you know, I've never been to Turkey. I would love to be down there walking around. And so now that I'm back, I realize the most important thing about the overview effect is that the foundation for what makes going to space special is the sea level effect. It's the fact that we have our human experience, our collective experience here on Earth, on the surface, that makes going to space so special. And trying to connect people to that is, I think, all of our missions when we come back from space, and trying to share that. And I'll just end with the words of some folks who captured some of these ideas much more poetically than I did. T.S. Eliot wrote in a poem that we shall not cease from exploration, and the end of our exploring will be to arrive at the place where we started and see it for the first time. And I think that that is a very healthy perspective. And then I'll end it for all of you scientists or engineers out there, for you techies that don't like poetry, I'll take you to Christmas Eve, 1968, when Bill Anders took maybe the most famous photograph ever taken, Earthrise, what drove our eventual adoption of Earth Day and the environmental movement that ensued after that. That in describing that picture, Bill Anders said, "We went all this way to explore the moon, but most important, we discovered Earth." And I think that is something that we all should meditate on. The special nature, the fragility, and how special our planet is, and how special and fragile human life are, and how we should do our best to protect both of those things. Thank you for going on this journey with me. And since I'm the only thing standing between you and the question and answer period, I will stop there so that we can get started. Over to you, Christine.
Victor, thanks so much. What an exciting journey, and thank you for sharing it in video and from your perspective. It was fantastic. It felt like we were up there with you, and I know I would personally love to be an astronaut, and I think Liz Warren there, I know she is like me, would love to be in your shoes. But there's also some folks who are on the line who have some questions, and I'm going to jump right into them. So let me start with we have a young man in Boston named Alejandro, and he is 7, and he wants to know if you have seen a hurricane from space.
Oh, great question, Alejandro. Unfortunately, we've seen lots of hurricanes from space, and I have seen a hurricane, or maybe the beginnings of a hurricane. When I was describing earlier that I was looking at the Bay of Biscay, one of the reasons that I was staring down at that particular part of the ocean was because the clouds looked like an eyeball. They were swirling, and it appeared to make an eyeball. And then when I looked across toward the horizon on the east coast of the United States, it looked like the other eyeball. So the Earth looked like a face because there were these two swirls going. But yes, we have witnessed hurricanes from space. And let me tell you, they look mean from up there too.
Thanks for that, Victor. There's a couple of questions about biology. So Jennifer, I'm going to start with one for you from Megan, who I believe is in Texas because her nickname is Lone Star. And she would like to know if you see a role for biotechnology in space and on the ISS.
Absolutely. So we already have a pretty robust biology and biotech program going on in the International Space Station. One of the interesting things we see in space is that cells behave differently, and we see that they more readily form 3D structures when they are not being disrupted by gravity. So one area I think we're going to see a huge amount of growth is in tissue engineering. We actually have a bioprinter aboard the International Space Station. And, you know, this is something that is very new and still kind of here on Earth when you're trying to print 3D structures. When you try to print 3D structures with biological material, either for something like use in a patient or for research, you have to fight against gravity. And so you need to use things like scaffolding to try to support it. And it can interfere with the growth, or then you have to dissolve that structure after, right? And so the amazing thing about being able to do these things in space is that, you know, it already forms a 3D structure more readily. And then you also aren't fighting against that gravity gradient. So I think that's one area I can't wait to see grow in the next few years. In the field of biotechnology, you know, we also have done a lot of projects in the past with biotech companies as well as pharmaceutical companies. So Liz, I know you have a lot of experience in this field too. Is there anything you'd like to add?
Sure. Thanks, Jennifer. I'll add that we do also a lot of human research in space. And something that we didn't talk a lot about earlier was the fact that when it looks like a lot of fun, of course, to be floating on the International Space Station. But when humans go to space, there's a number of changes that happen in the human body. Victor talked a lot about exercise, and one of the reasons we do a lot of exercise in low Earth orbit is because microgravity, when you remove gravity, we talked about all the wonderful things it does. It has some deleterious effects on the human body. You've probably heard about bone loss and muscle loss in astronauts. Spaceflight also causes some immune dysfunction and cardiovascular dysfunction. All of these changes that happen in astronauts, they appear pretty similar to disease processes here on Earth. And so some of the biotechnology experiments that we do on the space station are actually designed to understand and probe what is happening to cause such rapid changes in astronauts. And this is one area that is funded and of great interest to our NIH, our National Institutes of Health, and NSF, our National Science Foundation, because what an amazing opportunity to study disease processes in otherwise extremely healthy people. And these disease processes are very fast, so we call it an accelerated disease model. And then when our astronauts return back to Earth, so many of those disease processes are reversed. So again, it provides a fascinating opportunity to study, get some insight into what might be happening in disease processes that would take normally decades to study here on Earth. So microgravity is really an amazing place to study disease processes. And that is of great interest to many biotech and big pharma companies.
Thanks, Liz. That was actually answering a question from both Sharif and Monique, who wanted to know about how it might be similar to aging. And the question also was if you could suggest any reading material. Do you know of something that you can point them to? Maybe there's some things on our webpage that could outline some of that.
Absolutely. So both the nasa.gov website and the ISS National Lab.org websites have a tremendous amount of information. One fun thing to read about is something called tissue chips in space. I alluded to that earlier. This is actually what a tissue chip looks like. It's a small device. It's actually flexible. It's made of kind of a rubbery, biocompatible device. And if you look up tissue chips in space, I think you'll find some very fun and interesting reading material.
That's awesome. Thanks for that. There are so many questions out there. I'm going to try to get to as many as I can, and I might be lumping some of your questions together. Here's a question for you about, Victor, there were a lot of astronauts up there all at once. And it's a kind of a confined space. And you mentioned that you're trained in stress management. I might need to go take that class. So you might have to sign me up for that. But there's also a lot of stress for people in close quarters and lockdowns on Earth in the pandemic. And I wondered, and the audience wonders, if you could relate any of your experiences to close quarters and how that might relate to folks here on Earth in the pandemic with stress.
Absolutely, absolutely. The entire planet has been experiencing what life can be like pre-launch as we start. We call it the health stabilization program, or quarantine for short. And so the social distancing, physical distancing that's like what we do to make sure that we're not taking microbes and pathogens to the space station. And that's why you see astronauts on board ISS. Even when we got there and there was no vaccine, we didn't have to wear masks or distance because we've been in quarantine for almost 3 weeks prior to launching to space. So, I think, wow, to put it shortly, we spend a lot of time thinking about self-care, how to take care of ourselves, and really understanding and being honest with ourselves about our limitations, what our strengths and weaknesses. And then we take and apply that to the team and how we're interacting with each other, and then being able to be aware of those same things for each other. And so, that takes time. I would say the biggest thing is to get good at that, you have to be intentional. Take time to get to know yourself. Take time to get to know your teammates. And then I guess a recommendation is to also give as much grace as you can to both of those, to yourself and to your teammates, because there were days in space where I was working really hard and I didn't realize it. I didn't stop to go, hey guys, I need some help. But someone pulled me aside or tapped me on the shoulder and said, hey, can I help you with that? And it lifted so much weight. It changed my day. And so I tried to do that for other people as well. So giving yourself some grace and recognizing it's okay to say, I can't today. My wife has a coffee mug that says, I can't adult today. I love it. Sometimes you just can't, and it's okay. Acknowledge it, give yourself time, or compartmentalize it, put it on the shelf, and then come back and address it later. But give yourself some grace so that you have space to deal with whatever's going on, and give that same grace to each other.
Thanks for that, Victor. I think that's really good advice all around, pandemic or no. That's good advice. This one, I'm going to shoot over to Liz, but then Jennifer, you might have a response too. Rebecca has done some work with our parts from rodent research. So one of our researchers is on live here. Rebecca wants to know if there are some plans for upcoming rodent research missions.
Hello, Rebecca. Absolutely. So I was talking about models to understand either disease processes or understand some aspects of physiology. And so we do have a rodent research program on the International Space Station. And there's some very exciting, interesting experiments coming up. One of them I'll tell you about that actually involves a little bit of the tissue engineering that Jennifer mentioned earlier. So I'm going to tell you a little story here. You know, I live in Texas, actually, so does Victor and Jennifer. And if I go out in my backyard, when it's hot outside, there's all kinds of lizards running around. And sometimes, unfortunately, my cat might catch one, but the lizards are very smart, right? They have a little tail that if the cat grabs the tail, the lizard runs off, has a great day, grows a new tail. But you know what? That's actually a pretty fascinating process. How come we can't regrow tails? Well, we don't have tails, but how come we can't regrow limbs when we're injured? This is a very interesting question. And one of our upcoming experiments doesn't have to do with lizards, but has to do with regrowing injured tissue. And we understand that microgravity and spaceflight may have some negative impacts on the ability to heal wounds. Astronauts, you know, if you get a little scrape or a bruise, takes a little bit longer to heal. And we don't fully understand that. Some of it may have to do with the immune dysfunction I mentioned earlier. There may be some other factors, maybe some microbiome changes, or maybe some other immune function changes. So we're actually going to try and understand the wound healing process. And we do that in space to understand where maybe there's some things that are going wrong in that process. We can turn that around, bring that knowledge back to Earth, maybe understand how to heal better once we get back on Earth. And that's an interesting and exciting realm of research.
Thanks, Liz. I'll just add to that kind of the diversity of rodent research we do on the International Space Station. So the ISS National Lab is focused on research that benefits us here on Earth. Rodent research can also help us take a look at different exploration models and how do we develop countermeasures for our astronauts as we extend the missions or as we go on future exploration. Our human research program looks at rodent models to address issues that we've seen in long-term spaceflight. We've seen some vision changes in astronauts, and so we really want to get into the mechanism of why that's happening and what fundamentally is causing some structural changes that manifest in these symptoms, as well as fundamental biology. So as Liz mentioned, you know, microgravity is a great model for bone and muscle. So we see a lot of research coming through in those types of areas.
Thanks for that, both of you. And Rebecca, thanks for doing research with the space station. That is an important thing. And, you know, Victor personally took care of a lot of that research when he was up there. Our astronauts are our crew. They're our scientists, and they do those missions for us with the actual research. Victor, I'm going to throw you the softball question, though, here, because Ted and Emily want to know what you eat in space and what was your favorite.
Ooh, what you eat in space? Well, so the food in space is, there's a standard menu, an assortment of things that they send up: fruits, vegetables, soups, meat, different entrees and side dishes. Drinks, there's plenty of coffee. I love coffee, tea, and breakfast drinks in the sort. And then we're able to take about 10 to 20% of our food can be things that we've chosen, either from that standard menu, or as long as it meets the packaging, safety, and shelf stability, it'll last long enough without going bad, that we can choose those things and have those packaged and sent up to the ISS. And so I would say the most important aspect of food on ISS is variety. And so, you know, answering what my favorite is challenging, because, you know, if I told you maybe the first thing I had, it was macadamia nuts. And so those really stand out. I love macadamia nuts. I already did, and I love them even more. If I told you based on the thing I ate the most, it would be tomato basil soup, because tomato basil soup is great by itself. It's great hot or cold, but also tomato basil soup makes a great base for sauces for other things. And so variety is key in space. And so I spent a lot of time finding ways to combine the different foods to make new foods or variations of the foods. And so that was what I really enjoyed, is that the food system provided lots of ability to recombine and keep things interesting so that you didn't feel like you were eating the same thing for 168 days. Yeah, good question.
I think it is a good question. And, you know, everybody has their favorites. I wouldn't miss pizza. So I don't think you have pizza. Do you have pizza in space, Victor?
So we would take a flatbread and some tomato basil soup, and we have cheese. There's a cheese sauce, but then we in some of the cargo vehicles that have refrigeration, they'll send us up real blocks of cheese, and we could cut off some cheese, and then we can use different meats. If we got sent up, like we asked for some dry salami, and it's not pepperoni, but close enough, or chicken, and you could actually make pizza, and it wasn't bad. It's not Earth pizza, but space pizza is pretty good too.
I love your creativity. That's awesome. There's a lot of questions, and I'm going to try to combine them, Jennifer, into kind of a conglomeration of questions here about the plans for the space station. As noted, it's been announced that the station will continue into 2030, but what happens next, and what is NASA's role in deciding what's next?
That's a great question. So we got very exciting news at the end of last year. The NASA administrator, Bill Nelson, announced with the support of our current administration that they are going to be extending the ISS to 2030. So right now, kind of the what happens next phase is we're working with our international partners and their governments to finalize this extension, to talk about what our continued partnership looks like, what steps do we want to take going forward. We have a really robust research queue, so we have a lot of work to do in the next decade. We're going to be looking at what facilities we need to support that. We're using the ISS as a test bed for exploration. So, as we speak, and for the past several years, we're testing everything from coding and materials to how do we grow plants better, can we use regolith to build concrete-like substances for our next program. Life support systems are really big, and making sure we have those all worked out for future exploration. So, kind of personally, those are some of our near-term research goals. We also are seeing a big increase in the commercial space sector. So coming up at the end of March, we have our first private astronaut mission, or PAM mission, as we call them at NASA. And that is being flown by a company called Axiom. So we are going to be launching private astronauts to the International Space Station. They'll be, working alongside of U.S. astronauts on a variety of projects that have been selected by Axiom. We also, in 2020, as part of the broader Next Step initiative, NASA awarded Axiom about $140 million contract to build at least one habitable spacecraft that would then attach to the International Space Station. So folks are looking at how do you build new modules and attach those to the existing structure. And then kind of finally last year, at the end of the year, again, we announced a new program called the Commercial LEO Destination. So that is the what comes after space station. So we know that it will be a commercial effort. There were 3 companies or partnerships that were awarded the initial round of funding. And so we look forward to seeing their designs and their milestones. So, ultimately, as NASA transitions into exploration, we are going to see more users coming up and filling that piece of the commercial market, I think, in low Earth orbit.
Jennifer, thanks for that. And that's exciting for us too. Somebody else asked a question about what our role would be as a national lab. And I know that NASA is making plans for continuation of a national lab for people to access the space station. And I think that that's going to be really important. Liz, that's our role here as the National Lab caretakers. And so one of my questions for you is how do people who are listening to this go about getting a project up onto the space station so astronauts like Victor can take care of that science for them?
There are so many ways to get involved. So if you have some research that you think you want to send to the space station, there's kind of we ask one question first. And do you think your research is more aligned with NASA's missions of understanding and developing technologies for space exploration and keeping humans in space longer? Then you're going to want to look at NASA's webpage, and they've got an entire NASA research announcement process that is separate from what I'll talk about next, which is if you think you're science or your research project is more directed toward using microgravity to either advance your technology or develop a product or test something fundamental to understand that may be useful for benefiting us here on Earth, then you might want to come through the ISS National Laboratory. And I mentioned earlier that we've got a number of research announcements, kind of solicitations, where you can go and submit a proposal. Many of our proposal processes involve 2 steps. So you would first submit a very short concept, maybe a couple of pages, telling us what you envision for your project and why you need space. That's a very important one. Why you need to use the International Space Station, and what you expect to achieve. And if in response to that kind of a concept, we'll give you a go-ahead to develop a full proposal. And that proposal will go through a peer-reviewed external review process and a feasibility assessment for, can this actually be done on the International Space Station? So it sounds like there's several steps, but we try and make it really easy for you. And again, if you just want to bounce an idea off of us, contact Sean Pfeiffer. I gave that email address earlier in the presentation. And if you missed it, this entire event, this entire recording will be available on the issnationallab.org website, probably in a week or so, maybe a little bit earlier. But we encourage you to visit our solicitation or our research on ISS National Lab website and learn more. And we're really excited to hear your ideas. So that's why we're here today. We want to hear from you.
Hey, Sean, can you put your email in the chat box for folks so they can reach out to you? That'd be helpful. Sean's behind the scenes here, and he's helping to answer some of your questions and sending links to educational materials while we're all having a chat here. This one's for Victor, because, Victor, you're not going to get an easy ride today, and you didn't want it to be too easy. But people are asking about 2 things. You of course trained, and you showed some training video in the big swimming pool, and so you've had some experience before you go up there, but it's nothing like the real thing. So the 2 questions from a number of people in the audience are, what's it like when you get there? How hard is it to adjust? And then the other question is, something like, the flying is the easy part and the landing is the hard part. And as a pilot, I'm sure that's all about what you know. How is it getting adjusted again back on Earth after you've been in microgravity for the length of time you were? Tell us about your experiences in gravity.
Absolutely. So, the training piece gets you ready for quite a bit of what you can do in space, but it's like blocking and tackling in football, or just kicking a ball, or putting your hands up to block a ball, or bouncing it off your head. Those things don't mean you can play football, American or football. That's a piece, a fundamental. And that's true of everything. Spacewalk, the science. When you get to space, you actually have to learn to do everything, even all the stuff you've been trained to do and what you think you're familiar with. Now you have to do it in weightlessness with a team, people on board station, and people all around the world in different time zones, sometimes in different languages. And you have to do it on command and try to stay on timeline. And so the challenges and the constraints change. And so I would say this, I say this, it's a little bit philosophical, but it's true. Space is going to teach you how to do what you need to do, and you have to let space teach you. And so I would say the difficulty in making that transition from being a trained astronaut to being a flown astronaut is how quickly you let go of what you think you know and let space teach you what it knows. That's truly how I felt. Instead of fighting weightlessness, you look for one flash card in a bag of flashcards. If you open it, they're all going to fly out. Well, you learn how to do that without making a mess for yourself. But space will teach you that lesson every time you open the bag, if you let it. And so now adjusting. In flying airplanes, I think it's true. The flying is the easy part. Landing is the hard part, especially when you do it on an aircraft carrier. But in space flight, for me, and this is a very individual thing. You ask 50 astronauts, you're going to get at least 50 opinions, maybe more. But I think going to space and adjusting to living in weightlessness was more challenging than coming back to gravity. So after 5.5 months in space, coming back to Earth, It was slightly challenging. I think I felt great the whole time. I was really wobbly for the first couple of hours. You saw us walking down the steps and getting off the plane in the video, and Shannon's happy dance. You know, that's 6 or so hours after we landed. I felt really good. And I took this data point. If I went on a 6-month journey to Mars, current propulsion technology, it's going to take 6 to 9 months to travel to Mars. I would not get out of the spacecraft after we landed on Mars to start trying to move around boxes or build the hab or go on that first surface EVA for about 4 hours. It was about the 4-hour point that I felt like I could support my weight or one of my crew members if I had to. When they first pulled us out of the vehicle, I was so wobbly, and we're on a boat that I would have, the boat tilting a little bit, listing, I would have fallen over. And it's a really interesting experience. And I describe it to people as I felt like a 45-year-old toddler. You see them walking and, you know, they got it. And then all of a sudden they look fine and then they just fall over. And that's what it's like. But I think because, you know, my 44 years of life experience prior to going to space is in 1G, so that going to space is much more challenging. Coming back to Earth was still familiar. Even though I felt like a toddler, I knew how to walk. I just had to relearn it and prove it to my body. And so that adjustment for me was the easier one.
Thanks for that, Victor. I can only just imagine what it would be like. So thanks for sharing that. And it is interesting to have seen your video and see what it's like to come back and look at you as a 45-year-old toddler now. And when I talk to you next time, I'm going to think about that. So there's a bunch of questions about robotics and AI. So I'm going to try to combine them. Besma and some others have asked Jennifer about how you're using AI or advancing AI, whether it's to do the experiments. And Liz, you may have some thoughts on how we automate things. And Jennifer, are we able to, you know, replace humans at all in exploration or add value with computers and robotics on the station?
So we have a number of, I would call them experiments or technology demonstrations on ISS, looking at using AI and robotics to make life easier for the astronauts in space. So we've had a few in the past. Spheres was one that did a lot of different, you know, mapping technologies around the International Space Station, had a lot of student involvement through robotics competitions. Now we have Astrobee. We can use these things to help us map modules, to help us find things. So Victor may share a little bit later, or you guys may have seen in some of the pictures. We have a lot of stuff on space station. And so it's difficult sometimes to find the item that you're looking for. And so that's one way immediately that robotics is helping us with these, you know, free flying, small robots, basically using AI and their technology to try to help map the modules, you know, eventually maybe scan barcodes or do things to help us with our inventory just to make life easier. We also are looking at a lot of software tests that kind of run autonomous software to help guide crew members through certain situations. So, you know, these are all in demo and kind of experiment phases, but you know, we talk about these longer missions going to Mars. You know, you may end up in a situation where you don't have great comm back with the Earth and you have a medical situation happening. And so, you know, this is one of the areas that the Human Research Program is testing out. You know, can we develop programs or smart programs to help guide crew members through different scenarios? Same thing with maintenance procedures. You know, can we make the learning better and more effective and kind of more decision-based?
Thanks for that. Liz, any of the other things? Victor, did you have one? Some AI kind of thoughts?
Okay, I was just going to say, and you know, part of that question, someone asked about replacing the humans, and so I wanted to just make two comments. I'm a little invested in that question, right? I think the idea, I've heard someone mention it before, and I don't remember the exact numbers, but it was something on the order of, if you took a human to Mars, we would be able to gather the amount of data that the rovers that have been there for decades will have gathered in weeks or maybe a month. And so I forget the exact number, but that's a really profound perspective. And so I think, you know, AI is great. It's a tool, and we should think about working with the robots and AI and software automation are tools to help improve our human exploration, our exploration in total, but humans should always be a part of it because while we can teach software to play chess, right? We've made software now that can consistently beat humans in chess. That's impressive, but I can teach my daughter chess as well. And that AI can't teach you chess until we program it to do so. I can also make my daughter an omelet for breakfast and send her to school and encourage her to get better at chess. And so there's things that a human will always be able to do that software is only as good as you make it, which starts with a human. And so the other piece is what I said earlier about the big why, going to space. Humans will always be a part of it. I addressed this at the end of my video, but I want to say it again. Humans being in space gives us the human connection. And no matter how good robots, cyborgs, even ones that look like us, and until you have a human physical connection and an emotional connection with that thing, which we have naturally with each other, it's going to be different. Protecting the human in space drives other humans to do very challenging, very complicated things across nations, across borders, across languages, and across time to keep them safe. And it pushes us to be our best together. And so that human piece, I think, is one of the key links to keeping space as a very inspirational domain.
We'll keep the Watson computer just to be your sidekick then, Victor, and we won't let Watson take the helm. Liz, let me continue on that line about the commercial service providers and implementation partners that were mentioned are assets too. They use some automation and they also help us to de-risk projects. Can you talk a little bit about how, if you're doing a project in space, an implementation partner becomes a partner between us and astronauts and the researcher?
Absolutely. And I'll tell you, it's hard to top what Victor just said from the perspective of why we send humans to space. But to get to your question, Christine, automation can also help us de-risk, like you mentioned, de-risk projects, because we can do some science in higher throughput. For example, if you have automation, rather than requiring an astronaut to do a lot of perhaps repetitive tasks that are very time consuming, if we can have automation take care of some of those tasks, that may be a better use of resources. And so that may be where some of the automation is going. I really liked what Jennifer had to say, and that automation and AI can also be used as really a partner with the crew member, kind of help them with some tasks, especially when we go further out exploration wise. Some decision making may be able to be put back onto AI just to help crew members with their day-to-day tasks. But to bring it back to what we're doing on the space station today, just there are examples of commercial service providers, implementation partners like you mentioned, which are using small automation technology to take away some of the risk to the science. Even, for example, cell culture. There's a balance of how much you want to have crew members, for example, changing media for cells, which is a very manual task, can take a lot of time, has a little bit of risk in terms of contamination, versus if you have a system that can do that in an automated fashion, that takes away some of the risk of contamination and frees up that astronaut, that crew member time to be doing other tasks. So there's a balance, right? And I think it's as we go forward into what Jennifer was mentioning, the kind of the commercial LEO destinations, it's probably going to be both. We're probably going to have some resources dedicated to having the astronauts perform tasks, and some delegated to automation.
That's interesting, and thanks for that, Liz. There are so many questions, and folks who are on, thanks for your patience. We're trying to get as many as we can answered, and so I've just been checking those out. One for Victor again. When you're in space, there's not necessarily a doctor on board. What happens if somebody gets sick on the station?
That is a great question. So we train to be crew medical officers. I was the crew medical officer for this mission, and two of my other crewmates were previous CMOs. And so if I was to get sick, they could become the primary person to take care of us. And so, we We train as medical officers, but we also have a weekly conference with our crew surgeon. And so we can talk to them if something is going wrong, and they will guide us in what we need to do. But primarily, we will take care of each other. So one of your crewmates is going to take care of you. And so again, it's important to that time and intentionality that I talked about earlier in getting to know your team. We have to get to know each other. If somebody's not looking right, or hey, something just seems off, how you doing, how you feeling? We check up on each other regularly so that we know when something is different and maybe someone is not feeling well. And then it's going to be one of us that takes care of each other. For example, after spacewalks, there's a regular checkup that you do. They want to see your eardrums because of the pressure changes, making sure your eardrums are healthy. They want to see your eyes and your hands. And so we take pictures. Well, we usually do that for each other to get all those pictures collected for the ground. And so we really take care of each other, but we have a host of medications. For example, motion sickness is one. Some people are susceptible to, being in weightlessness. For those of you out there that aren't rocket scientists, going to orbit is essentially going into free fall. We were in free fall for 168 days. So if you remember the first time you jumped off the high dive and that feeling you got in your stomach, you may get that. It doesn't last for 6 months. You get used to it. But that sensation initially can be off-putting for some people, literally. And so we have oral medication that you can take. And if it gets really bad and the person is unable to do their job, there's even an injection that I could have pulled out and given someone an injection to keep them healthy. But that's, we have a suite of capability. And most important, you saw in one of the videos, someone was doing a robotic surgery, and you saw it next to our robotic arm, talking about telemedicine. And we have a similar capability, a little bit of that capability on ISS as well. Again, we talk to our crew surgeons once a week, but if it really came down to it and we had a medical emergency, the doctors would be on, the console in mission control, watching us as we were the instrument that they were guiding to take care of our crewmates. So again, you'd be your crewmates taking care of each other, but we have the best medical team on the planet, actually all around the planet, taking care of us remotely.
That's excellent to know. And again, you're such multitaskers up there. You're a pilot, you have to be the flight surgeon, you have to do the research for people. It's an amazing job. I'm gonna take one from Sophia is 9, and she wants to know what kind of jobs you can get in space. Obviously astronaut, but there's a lot of other jobs that support you, Victor. Tell us about other jobs.
Oh, absolutely. Wow. How long do we have? This effort is made possible by the humans living and working in space, is made possible by teams of scientists and engineers all over the world, university partners, corporate partners, building technology, creating software and hardware that enable us to live in space. I mean, you can be a physicist, a mathematician, you can be a pilot at NASA. We have pilots at NASA that aren't astronauts. They're research pilots, and they fly lots of different aircraft to do science and personnel transportation, all kinds of things. And you also can do logistics. One of the things that I think does not get enough attention is the logistics. Moving things around, especially when they have to go to or through space to get back down to Earth, is extremely challenging. And the people who manage that, they're professional logisticians. And that's something that it doesn't get the attention that it deserves, but it is absolutely vital to getting things to and from space safely, humans and hardware, cargo. But there's a multitude of things that you can do in the science and technology world to support, space and space exploration.
That's correct. And Sophia, I work here, and I have an MBA, so my degree is in business. Jennifer Buckley and Liz Warren are both scientists. So Liz, what kind of science did you study?
I'm a physiologist, but Sophia, let me also add to the long list of potential occupations. If you want to be involved in space, there are artists that work in the space program. There are poets that work in the space program. There's photographers that work in the space program. Lots and lots of different types of engineering, lots and lots of different types of science. There are lawyers that work in the space program. There are people who design textiles. Those spacesuits that you saw in the video, those are made of cloth. Well, several layers of other protective garments as well. But holy cow, there's so many different types of jobs. So I would say if space is something that is pretty interesting to you, do what most interests you, and you could get involved in space and a job in the space industry doing just about anything. You can be a writer. My goodness, you can be a journalist. Oh, the list goes on and on. So stay involved, stay curious, and check back with us when you're ready to get to work, because we need you.
And students who are out there, please go to our website. There is something called Space Station Explorers, which has lots of great information, and Jennifer's nasa.gov site also has lots of great stuff for students. I'm going to have to start wrapping up soon. So here's the question for Jennifer, and this is regarding, again, the future of space and in-space production, so making things in space. And I wondered if you could talk about NASA's focus on that, and a little bit about the NRAs that you have to support those kinds of programs.
Sure. So this is really an area where we see, some of NASA's commercial efforts overlapping with the research efforts. So this is a part of the portfolio that focuses on in-space production. So it can be, very early stages or phased approach on, taking a look at things that have commercial applications that can be manufactured or made in space. And just like the variety of research we do on the International Space Station, you see a huge variety in the types of projects that come in through these types of avenues. So you'll see some things that are focused very heavily on biology and biotech. Like there was a project that initially came in as a research project through the International Lab, looking at growing artificial retinas in space, right? How do we make that better and more possible, which has huge, benefits here on Earth. There's also been research on materials for things like Zealand fibers. So I think when we talked about what are the things to watch, in the next decade with ISS extension, I think this will be a really interesting transformation for us to keep an eye on.
And then Liz, we have some at the National Lab for in-space production, and I think one is opening up soon. So can you just talk about, so there's some solicitations that you can go to with NASA, and there's also some for us at the National Lab. Can you just give us a little bit of info on those, and where do people look for those?
Absolutely. So if you're interested in, or if you have something that you want to test and manufacture in space, there are a lot of different opportunities. As Jennifer mentioned, there's a nasa.gov website where you can go and find research announcements in space production or in space manufacturing. The same types of resources are available at the ISS National Lab. It just maybe kind of depends on if you're at the very early stage, understanding fundamental, versus if you're, and that may be more like on the NASA funding side, or if you're a little later stage and wanting to get more toward making this a commercial endeavor, you may seek resources from the ISS National Lab. So if this is something that intrigues you, I encourage you to look at both of our solicitation web pages. There's lots of different opportunities, and I'll point out that there's in-space production for materials, like Jennifer mentioned. Also, there's in-space production for biomanufacturing. Also, she mentioned the artificial retina or stem cells are an important topic. The tissues that were mentioned earlier, or organs. There's a lot of different, this is actually an extremely exciting field. And I think this is going to be something that is available and continuing for many, many years to develop. So if this is something that is intriguing to you, and again, it's using microgravity, using some aspect of microgravity to improve a manufacturing process. And, again, it's like looking at your science, looking at your topic, you're looking at your product with an entirely new lens of discovery. You can remove artifacts that you don't even know are there, that are caused by gravity and sedimentation. So like I mentioned earlier, that, thin film deposition, there's a lot of opportunities. So check them out.
Yeah, that's terrific. And I wish we had more time because we have more questions. So if you've done research with us, and I know there's a few people out there who've done some research with us, thanks for joining us today. Come on back and do more research with us. If you're thinking about how you can do research and you want to know more, this is Sean Pfeiffer from our team, and he would be happy to talk to you about how you can get those kinds of things literally off the ground. So please reach out to Sean. I want to thank Jennifer, Liz, and certainly Victor for all you've shared with us today. It's been a great pleasure to be with you. Please go to our website and also go to nasa.gov for more information. And this has been recorded. So if you wish to share this recording, it will be posted on our website in a few days, and you're welcome to share this with your friends. Thank you all for joining. It's been a great pleasure.